everyone joining us today for a discussion on social media crimes and liability in India. On behalf of Oakbridge Publishing and Lawyered, I extend a warm welcome to Advocate Puneet Bhasin, a pioneering cyber law expert and our author, who will be sharing her experience and expertise on the subject. We also welcome Mr. Akshay Garkil, partner and leader cyber at Grant Thornton Bharat LLP. Mr. Garkil is a business leader with 20 plus years of work experience across private and public sectors, with experience in information security and cybersecurity in various geographies, including India, APAC, and Middle East. Mr. Garkil will moderate the discussion today and will bring to bear his own insights and perspective. Social media is a part of our day to day lives today, and most of us use these platforms with abandon. While social media has opened several avenues for its users to communicate with the world and to create business opportunities, it has also become a medium for perpetrating mischief. The proliferation of crimes on social media and the technological innovation in committing these crimes necessitate that we have robust laws to deal with them, coupled with user education to prevent them. Today, we will explore the various kinds of social media crimes and the laws that are applicable. I now request Mr. Garkil to open the discussion and take it forward from here.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, and welcome, Advocate Puneet Basin, and thank you for having me over to moderate this session. So, Puneet, before we put you in the spot and ask you all the relevant questions, just want to give some background in terms of, first of all, congratulations on the book that essentially is getting launched. And just want to share some perspective before I go to my first question to you. And essentially we've seen that today, with the social media advent only increasing, we've seen that for everyone, social media has essentially become a platform where they can actually become creators and not just consumers. We've also basically seen that social media or OTT platform or digital media platform have actually led to a rise in usage, especially during the special times of pandemic. At that point in time, we saw a huge rise in usage, which also had its own set of disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages, like cyberbullying, harassment, privacy breaches, use of content which was not moderated or regulated from a perspective from, and then of course we've seen various forms of cyber attacks and data breaches that have happened. We've also seen some kind of a domino effect on social media based on certain posts which have actually led to an outcry within the country as well. So from that perspective, of course, we've seen the new IT rules 2021, where the intermediary guidelines and digital ethics code 2021 has been released, and which essentially focuses on the objective of safeguarding the user rights and ensuring responsible internet freedom, right? So with that, essentially, I'll go to my first question, Puneet. My first question is that we've seen typically more than 400% of rise, and if you look at the NCRB data, more than 400% rise in cybercrime cases against children, which were reported. More than 50,000 cases of cybercrime again, which was reported in 2020, which included more than 900 plus cases of cyber stalking and bullying on women and children again. And again, 149 cases out of that were through fake profiles, right? So my question here is that, we've essentially seen that, uh, the IT rules 2021, right, which essentially has come into the news. We had UN also actually expressing serious concerns on those laws, on which basically there were, a legislation which said that the infringement on human rights and freedom of expression was actually questionable. And then again, of course, we had the government of India, which duly answered and responded to all of these concerns. So, what are your views on this, and where do you think, based on all this background, this particular IT Rule 2021, is heading towards?
See, as a matter of fact, if you will see, a lot of nations today have not actually regulated a lot of social media platforms and OTT platforms. So, if you will have an overview among nations, either they are those who are highly regulated. For example, China has legislations controlling all of this to the minutest details.
Sure.
Whereas if you see countries in like United States of America, you see the states of in Europe, the amount of regulation of this content is still very nascent. As a matter of fact, India has actually come out with a legislation which many other nations, including those of the developed countries, have not yet attempted. It is still in a very nascent stage there. And China is the one which is absolutely highly regulated. So obviously, when India came out with this legislation, the first thing which even the political parties in India, the common man in India would think, why really regulate content on social media platforms? It's not needed. Now, the risks of this is extremely high for the vulnerable categories using these portals. So whether it may be children, women, this category is required to be protected. So let's say today a lot of men who are using social media, they also do fall victim to such offenses, but the kind of offenses against women are absolutely horrendous. So these kind of offenses include nudification, creating fake profiles online, and uh, chatting with people using some other woman's details, picking up pictures from social media, putting them on escort websites, children who are being lured, who are also being profiled on social media websites. So there are so many things that are happening, and if this area is not regulated, we are just looking at a huge population of India which is coming under this vulnerable category, falling victim to these cyber crimes. Now, primarily, why this would be thought of as breach of the freedom of speech and expression is because of so many users today generating their own content on intermediary platforms, and platforms not having strong checks on them. Now, there are certain reasonable limitations that are allowed by the law, by the constitution itself, on every single fundamental right. As a fundamental right, yes, you have a right to express, you have a right to speech, but there are reasonable restrictions where it cannot violate or encroach upon another person's fundamental right. So here, the right to life of a child, the right to life of women also includes the right to live with dignity. So it can definitely not encroach upon those rights. So from that perspective, if you will look at this piece of legislation, it is purely within the ambit of law, though there were multiple questions raised and it's still in deliberation. So there are multiple litigations also filed questioning the legal ambit of this particular legislation, whether or not it is constitutional. But in my opinion, this is purely my opinion over here, that it definitely is constitutional because it comes within the reasonable restraints which can be applied to fundamental rights. Now, if you will see the justification which the government has also provided to the United Nations, that also clearly outlines that one of the key objectives of this legislation has been protection of women and children primarily against offenses committed against them on social media platforms.
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. In fact, if you see in 2018, Ministry of IT and Telecommunication actually has taken broad consultation from various industry forums before even drafting these rules. And if you see, as you rightly pointed out, it has essentially been purely from a end user protection perspective, and there have been a lot of areas which have covered it. And from that, I'm coming to my next question, Puneet, in terms of the social media, if you look at some of the social media companies who've essentially been mandated on due diligence for regulations, right? Especially on the monitoring of the content. There have been new rules, where these companies have been responsible in adhering to government mandates. For example, publishing of rules or policies, end user privacy policies, and so on and so forth. And also, acting on certain defamatory and obscene content, right? So from that perspective, we've seen some examples in the past with some social media companies. Some of the past incidents which are available in public forum, like the issues that happened with Facebook in the past, with WhatsApp again, with respect to sharing of the information right from the originator of the information and the message and so on and so forth, right? So what are your views in terms of these regulatory obligations from a social media company perspective, and what do you feel, are they right? If they should be followed, do they need to be further scrutinized, or are they violating the end user rights and so on and so forth?
See, with respect to the first originator, Now, the first originator, this detail can be sought only by the court. So it is not that randomly any person is going to issue a legal notice or any person is randomly going to obtain any such information, and also not the chats or the content or the media, nothing of that sort of the first originator. Only the details of the first originator in India who has started the spread of a message. Now the reason, now this has also come up before courts multiple times since the rules have come into force, with the questions that, oh, this is also a breach of confidentiality of the privacy of an individual. But you need to understand, if a person is spreading, let's say, a fake news which is leading to communal violence or leading to any particular category of people getting hurt, or maybe loss of life and death, like in COVID, there were so many fake news portals which were available, which were spreading false news, false medications that were being offered out, and any such message which is actually harmful. And in such a situation, it is actually an offense. It is a cyber crime. How can you then say that the person can exercise a right of privacy in such a situation? It's like today any person commits an offense and says, I have the right to be protected where no detail of mine should be revealed. So one side we are telling the government, we are telling the police and the law enforcement, the conviction rate in cyber crimes is very low. Now, why is the conviction rate in cyber crimes very low? Because the perpetrator is not easily traced. Why exactly the tracing doesn't happen? Because these social media companies have head offices located outside India. They are governed by laws which are of countries where they are incorporated outside India. The standard answer these companies give is, we are governed by the law of our own nation. Kindly get a court order in order to obtain any information. Now, getting a court order, the entire process, how many people really have the budgets to go in for such lengthy litigation? And post that also, the chances that you may or may not get the data, if the data crosses a particular period, the social media platform can say, we have erased that data. So why are we really getting into that? When we want a conviction rate, one side we say we want accountability, one side we say we want a conviction rate in the offenses. Then the other side, how can we say that even the perpetrator should not be revealed, the endpoint person should not be revealed? So you cannot play on two sides of a coin. So if you want a conviction rate, then there has to be some amount of transparency at the end of the social media platforms in sharing, if with respect to offenses. So here we are talking about the court directing the companies to provide this data. It is not that somebody is individually going and seeking this data. So if the court is asking for that data, then that much trust people should have on the judiciary that random information is not going to be sought. And it's only in the case of some offense or critical information where there's threat to the nation, threat to the fundamental rights of people, or potential offenses that have committed, or already a cybercrime that is committed. It's only in such a situation that such data will be sought.
Right. And we've seen certain rules which essentially have started coming in terms of preserving the information for 180 days, or
Yes.
essentially providing assistance in a lawfully authorized government agency within 72 hours. Those are
Hmm.
some of the rules essentially which have essentially come through. Uh, however, very valid point that you brought out on the cross-border jurisdiction, and how do you basically make any of these offenses admissible in the court of law within our country. So my question is that we've seen in the past, right, social media company essentially was hesitant to comply with the new IT rules, and stating that they were not bound by the Indian laws. And as you rightly pointed out, right, that's another example which was again available in the open forums, and we've read it in all the articles in the newspapers. Again, some new rules which required certain social media companies to kind of operate through encrypted messaging. But again, as we rightly pointed out, the to trace the originator of the message, right? So that but that again, counter argument to that was that that would break the encryption, and
Hmm.
we are bound by the privacy laws, which essentially, and we are also bound by the trust of the end users, etc., right? So how do you differentiate between a normal user and an offender as an end user? So again, there were a lot of back and forth on that as well, and I'm sure we'll be happy to hear from you in terms of the legal perspective there. But my question here is that when you look at the new rules which are basically coming up, or have already been drafted, we have the Indian Data Protection Bill also coming up. So from that perspective, how do we make sure that all the foreign incorporated social media companies essentially who serve as a platform for publishing content in India, under the Indian jurisdiction, again, how do we make them accountable in terms of the crimes or the cyber crimes which result on their platform? Number one. Number two, even if there's a concept of data localization which most of the regulators in the country have been pushing very hard and mandated for a lot of legal entities to follow, and those legal entities also are the social media companies. So how do you think, Puneet, these rules will really play out, and will we be able to bring all of that to the country and make the social media companies accountable from that perspective?
See, I will give an answer to your questions in multiple parts over here. The first part with respect to the encryption, now you need to understand encryption. There can be a message level encryption of chats and a encryption separately that can be there with respect to the information on the details of a user. So currently, yes, let's say these platforms are having a common standard of encryption, a common operation with respect to encryption. But technically, it is definitely possible to bifurcate the same. So what the law also said, there was enough time provided. So the a bill was already in circulation. As a matter of fact, even when it came into force, there was a time of additional months which was provided to all the social media platforms to comply, which means you actually had time to change your technical processes to ensure compliance. Now the entire perspective at that point of time, because see, it has been an open field for all social media companies in India for the past 10 years. They have been absolutely unregulated. So it's like suddenly there is a noose put around your neck and you're told comply. So the first reaction was, why should I comply? I have never been in compliance here. So that was the first knee-jerk reaction. Though, as a matter of fact, Twitter, all of them at the end of the day have complied. All of them are appointing grievance officers. They are developing their grievance redressal mechanism, encryption standards. Everybody is trying to comply. Now, for example, if this was the United States of America, wouldn't these platforms comply? Today in the EU region, aren't they complying with GDPR? So then in India, for Indian population, why wouldn't you comply with the intermediary rules? So whichever nation you are operating in, the users are of that nation, you have to comply with the law of the land. There is no option that. So that was just a knee-jerk reaction at that point of time with by a lot of social media companies, because they simply had an open field day in India for the last 10 years, and that scenario suddenly changed. Now coming to the PDP bill, now obviously this was the first noose tightening in the neck, which was the intermediary rules. The Indian Data Protection Bill, once enacted, is actually going to put a lot of structure in place, legal compliance in place for organizations which are dealing with Indian data. Now, most of the organizations which are highly data heavy in dealing with Indian citizen data are actually social media platforms, because we are sharing our own data with them. They are the ones which are absolutely data heavy and the ones which have to be absolutely compliant. So the entire process for them becomes way tougher once the Indian Data Protection Bill is enacted. So they, apart from the fact, like if they are finding the intermediary guidelines difficult to comply with, the PDP bill is way more complicated with respect to having proper privacy checks. They need to, even, as a matter of fact, there's a data trust score which is accorded. So based on your data practices, publicly your trust score is declared on a website belonging to the Data Protection Authority. Which means if your data trust score is low, it is not just going to influence your user perspective, it is also probably going to influence your share values. It is going to influence a lot of things. Like today,
Brand
how is the
reputation as
price of
well.
your company really determined? It is determined by multiple factors. And imagine if your data trust score comes down, it will dynamically change the overall perspective of people, shareholders, everybody towards, including the markets towards your organization. So that is why for data heavy companies, that comes as a major, you could say, shock, that if this bill comes into place, suddenly we have to really pull up our socks. We need to take people seriously. We need to take their consent before we do anything with their data. We need to, adhere to norms. Like today, there is data being used left, right, center without any consent. Suddenly, all of that is not okay. Tomorrow, you cannot just try to, view my shopping habits and try to sell me 10 other things. That is not okay. And people are also going to question these things when the law is mentioning that this is not okay. So that exact scenario is already there, where the organizations are realizing, they're waking up to this conscious fact that once the PDP bill comes in, they will have to start moving towards compliance. For the third part of your question, which was there. Now, this entire scenario with respect to platforms where you're seeing, where they feel that technically it is difficult, all of this is difficult, end of the day, they don't have a choice and they have to comply. And to come and operate in the Indian jurisdiction, the intermediary rules mandate them to have an office in India. So till now, what was the excuse? If there was any offense committed which involved a platform abroad, the entire excuse of any organization was, we are governed by the laws of our own country. So please get a court order, then we will comply. Now that excuse will not work, because there's going to be an office over here which is accorded, which those details are shared with the Data Protection Authority, or over here with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which is there. The details will have to be shared. There has to be a chief compliance officer over here, a nodal officer, a grievance officer, which means suddenly three people highly accountable for everything are sitting right here as representatives of the social media platform. So now that escape route of saying that, the law doesn't bind me, and, you just find out a method, go get an order, go get this, that's not really going to work.
Sure, absolutely. And in fact, we've seen, the law essentially entailing some of the aspects in terms of incident response perspective is like, where social medias essentially need to, any of the contentious content per se needs to be taken down much faster now.
Yes.
Maybe appoint some grievance officer and assist in investigation, which you rightly pointed out. You look at some kind of a if there is a consistent non-compliance, then that safe harbor immunity essentially also goes away, right?
Yes.
And then of course you look at some more aspects around having a physical contact address with a registered office within the country, so that that legal entity essentially is under the purview of the law of the land.
Yes.
Right. So we've definitely seen those, and I think thank you for that perspective, Puneet. I'll go to my next question and the next perspective, and the next question is more on uh, you know um, how social media companies have started to become aggregator platforms, and they've been bringing in other value added services like wallet based services, digital payments, and now it's not only about data here, but it's also about financial data, right? It's not only about brand reputation at stake, but it's also a financial loss of protection of individual financial perspective also, right? So now we've seen that for example, statistically we've seen that when you take an example of WhatsApp essentially started their payment services of late, and we've seen based on certain again forums and statistics, we've seen that in India, WhatsApp has grown to more than 40 million users. Again, WhatsApp has close to about 500 users, 500 million users, where we've seen that in India, the penetration both at the urban and the rural areas have increased. That means that there is a high potential of that 40 million users also growing at a very fast pace in terms of the payment services. Now, my question here is that not only about the current but also future as well. How do we see the social media companies serving and complying to the digital banking laws, the payment laws? And again, it's a huge risk because if they don't comply, then essentially the financial frauds are only going to increase, and the increase is going to be super exponential within the country. And last part of my statement is that question is that what would be the legal recourse, from a perspective that government and the social media companies need to take.
See, from a perspective, I would say the government at a very right time came out with these rules. Even the data protection law honestly should have been passed by now, considering the kind of dynamism with which social media platforms are developing, growing, and having a penetration. It has taken longer, and hopefully in this current year, it should really get enacted. If it's not, I think it'll be a very big delay that will be there. And in this time lag, there will be multiple offenses committed with respect to data. Now, the reason I say the intermediary rules came at a very right time is because a lot of social media platforms were starting their own payment wallets at that point of time. So, which also meant that they had to be brought under the purview of Indian law. Now, how can they be intermediaries saying that I'm going to offer you a financial service and I'm going to be governed by the law of another country, but I'm going to offer you services in your country? You are a citizen of that country. And if tomorrow something happens, where are you going to go and file a complaint? Big question. That organization belongs to another nation. There, are you going to have the means to go to a foreign country and file a complaint for recovering your money? Over here, no data available. There is no way an investigation can happen. They will not provide the data. So I think the government came out with these rules at a very, very apt time, wherein they are brought within the ambit wherein these wallets will also have to be compliant with all the RBI guidelines. So today, there will not be much of a difference between a Paytm wallet and the social media wallets or their payment services. They have to comply with the RBI. They cannot say, I'm not under the purview, I'm governed by my own laws. That entire option is not going to remain with them. And this happened prior to them launching such services. So I think this timing was also very much kept in mind to ensure that, today, let's say there are only, people's data which is being peddled. There is offenses involving their profiles, etc. But imagine, once offenses starts involving money, the citizens of India are also going to start feeling the pinch. Right now, probably the pinch is not that strong, but the moment it involves money, the pinch is going to become strong. And then, if there is no grievance officer in India, there is no redressal mechanism here, where is the common man going to go to fight for his rights? That is exactly where the rules play a very, very key role at the right time before the launch of all these services.
Sure. And in fact, if you look at the payment security master direction circular, which has been issued by RBI, it also talks about the cross-border data, not only the data but the financial transaction information also has to come back within the country within 24 hours, and all foreign instances have to be deleted after the clearing, right? And in case if the ancillary systems essentially are sitting overseas, then too the information can only be taken on need to know basis. However, all the payment strings and the data has to be in country, a max within coming back within 24 hours, right? So thank you so much for that, Puneet. I'll move to my next question. And my next question is actually on the significant social media companies, the SSMIs, right? Where the number of registered users have exceeded more than 50 lakhs today, right? And for those kind of social media companies or SSMIs, what are the additional liabilities on mandates in terms of, say, for example, how do they generate the data? So the entire data life cycle, how do they handle it from a legal perspective, and what are the mandates and the rules? So whether you talk about data generation, you talk about data collection, processing, storage, dissemination, and you also spoke about consent in the data protection perspective. And another important aspect, is on the right to forget, right? And when you say right to forget, that means the last mile instance of my data has to be deleted, apart from what is kept for the law enforcement agencies once the Data Protection Act essentially comes into being. So, from that standpoint, could you throw some light on this issue?
See, as I told you, the intermediary rules are like step one. From this, it will evolve to the personal data protection law. So as soon as the organizations start complying with this, they have officers over here, then thereafter comes the PDP. So when that comes, a lot of organizations are going to be more ready and compliant at that stage. Now, when you talk about the significant social media intermediaries, are those having more than 50 lakh users. Today, a lot of social media platforms have users less than 50 lakhs, those above 50 lakhs. Now, when you're talking of intermediaries, it may not only be social media platforms. So, one thing you need to understand is all intermediaries, any person offering services online is an intermediary and comes within the ambit and the compliance of the intermediary rules. For social media platforms, there are some additional compliances. The others also need to have a grievance officer. They also need to have a compliance. They also need to go through the whole thing. But where you are a significant social media intermediary, you need to have a proper grievance redressal policy. You need to have the entire mechanism in place available to a user. You need to have an office over here in India. You need to have the key personals like the nodal officer, chief compliance officer, all of them in place, zonal head also in place, and they are reportable and answerable to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. So that entire thing is applicable. So where the users are going to be more than 50 lakhs, considering the impact that anything can have with such a huge number of users, is where the ministry itself gets involved into keeping a check on the activities of these platforms then and their compliance.
Absolutely. And if you, I think again, some of the additional points are, in terms of enabling the identification of the first originator of information, and that is again a mandate apart from, of course, all the points that you mentioned in terms of a chief compliance officer, nodal officer, and things like that. So absolutely, that's a very valid point. Puneet, I'm coming to my last question, and after that, we'll open the dice for questions from the audience. My question is, we've seen fraud essentially has emerged as one of the key motives of intent, right? So more than 30,000 cases, or 60% has formed a 60% of the cyber crimes in the year 2020. Again, we've seen that other motives like sexual exploitation has formed about 7%. Extortion causing disruption came next in the list, and of course, summing it up, 80% of all of this essentially has been reported as the cybercrime in 2020, and this is an NCRB data that I'm sharing. Now, my question here is that cyber crimes through social media platforms have also risen rapidly in the last 2 years, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic time, because that's where we've seen fair bit of idle time at different people operating from remote locations and
Yeah.
homes, etc. Right? So are the new rules essentially going to be addressing those kind of issues as well today? And then maybe I'll just open up your thought process, request you to kind of open up your thought process for all of us, including me and the audience, in terms of what do you look at as key takeaways from this particular rule, and what is the future trend, and where do you think the government really needs to think, or the think tank essentially needs to focus on?
See, the first thing with respect to fraud topping the list, the reason is actually there have been more sexual harassment complaints on online platforms. The problem has been the reporting of those offenses has not been, you could say much from the women's end or from the children's end. Now, I'll give you one example. You speak to any woman and she will tell you, okay, does your social media inbox have some random guy sending you some of the other random messages which are offensive? Almost every woman in India will tell you she has experienced this. Has she filed a complaint? No. Now, in India, a lot of women tend to ignore this kind of harassment. So you do not see the statistics of that go up. Secondly, a lot of women also, if they are too harassed by a platform, then they will stop using the platform instead of going to the police and having to explain to the police how they have been harassed online. So when you say frauds are topping the list, yes, that would be in terms of reported crimes, I definitely admit. But if you will see the unreported offenses, a lot of cyber stalking or sexual harassment of women is what would really be topping the list. Because that is happening day in and day out, whether it may be any social media platform. But it's just unreported. With respect to frauds, yes, during the COVID period, people suffered financial crunch. And obviously, this became an opportunity for online criminals also, where people started using a lot more of digital payment methodologies. Many times, senior citizens, people who are not fully well versed how to.
I think we've lost Puneet. We'll just wait. I think her connection would have got disconnected. She should be back.
I think we are still live. We can
Yeah.
continue. Yes.
Yeah.
So, if you will see the COVID period, at that point of time, a lot of vulnerable category of people were using the internet. They were vulnerable because they did not know how to use debit card, credit card properly. They did not know how to use payment wallets, especially senior citizens. So people who would do physical banking suddenly were thrust into using a smartphone and doing online banking. Now, this obviously is like an opportunity for any cyber criminal to take up, where they know this category of people, they don't have too much of an idea about this subject, they're new to it. And that is exactly where the cases of online financial fraud saw a tremendous rise. So a huge rise. Suddenly, people in lockdown couldn't go out and do anything and everything went online. And that was the period which was the peaking period for these kind of offenses. Another reason why offenses peaked in that period is because, especially in cases of SIM swapping, that in the event your SIM card stops working and somebody has created another SIM card and is doing net banking using your SIM card, you would have to go to the nearest store of your mobile service provider and complain. Now, when the lockdown happened, a lot of organizations also did not have their online systems in place. Today, if you face a SIM swapping, you can immediately contact the SIM mobile service company and they will immediately take action. Earlier on, it was a physical process, which meant during a lockdown, the chances of you being able to go and complain, get the SIM blocked, all of that would become way more difficult, giving a huge opportunity to cyber criminals to go about taking advantage of the situation. So that's one of the reasons why you would see 2020 and 2021 was a period where these offenses were peaking. Today, comparatively, users are more educated. Organizations have gone online, including mobile service companies. So you can even block your SIM today online. So all these things have happened even at the tip of a phone call, which was not there then. So that was one of the reasons why regulating social media platforms also became essential, because a lot of information about users was going out from social media. So criminals, when they're mining information, they're picking up your information from social media. So whether it may be information about where you reside, your contact details, where you may be banking, a lot of things. Like nowadays, there are applications which have the option of even mentioning which portals you're buying things from and sharing it on your social media. Now, what tends to happen is today you're giving cyber criminals an insight which are the portals you are shopping on. And further, they can end up sending you phishing or wishing emails or messages with respect to this, pertaining to what interests you in particular. So it opens a lot of gateways to information about you, and it's easy to manipulate. The moment a person understands your mindset, your likes, your dislikes, the chances, like today, people will say, I will not be fooled by a phishing email. I will not be fooled by a phishing scam. Now, all this is only good as long as it is not pertaining to something that is really of interest to you. Like, let's say, I'll give you one example. Today, you like a particular brand you're shopping from. On Facebook, you put it up that, I have bought an XYZ, really top notch brand shirt from so and so portal, and it's awesome. You can also check it out. Now, this was going on during that period also. Now, what does that convey to cyber criminals? Okay, Akshay Garkal has a liking for so and so brand. Now, let's say after a month, 2 months, when the matter is absolutely cold, you receive a phone call that says that, okay, we are from so and so brand, and there is an offer going on with us, and we are going to give you a 40% discount. It's clearance. We just want to clear our stock, and 40% if you are willing to purchase within the next 1 hour. Now, you really like that brand. Now, obviously, the criminal knows you really, really like it. This is something you are potentially going to buy. The chances you will fall for this scam is almost 99%. You are not really going to doubt it at that point of time. The same thing if it was of a brand that was not of interest to you. The first question that would come to your mind is, this is a phishing scam. So, the kind of manipulation that is possible once the criminal knows your mind, and social media platforms end up giving that avenue to them to know your mind, understand you. So it's like understand your victim or know your victim. The way we say know your customer, these portals become avenues for know your victim. And that's something that needs to be really taken care of. And that's why these rules are essential to protect people from becoming victims in the process.
Sure. And Puneet, in the same breath, if I can ask you, do you think government rules need to simplify to kind of prosecute these culprits?
Well, they're actually quite simplified. What it requires now is actual prosecution and implementation.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I think, those thoughts have been really good and, very, very enlightening thoughts. Thank you so much for your time, Puneet. And what we'll do now is we'll kind of open it up for questions. We have a couple of questions, and I'll start reading them. And you can essentially feel free to answer. So the first question is from Vikesh Dhyani, and the question is, how can organizations and institutes sensitize their people to ensure responsible behavior on social media, and also safeguard their people if they become victim of social media crimes?
Well, I think organizations should, as a goodwill gesture, undertake trainings for their employees and people associated with them. Vendors, employees, all of them form a part of the same ecosystem. So if organizations as a goodwill gesture are willing to invest their time and money in this activity, I think it's something that people, your employees themselves, will appreciate that you care for them. And it will also benefit them in the process, where they don't fall victims to such offenses, which at the end of the day can impact your organization. Today, if an employee becomes that weak link in your organization, the chances are that even your organizational data is at risk.
Sure. Thank you. The next question essentially is from Vasudha Arora, and she says, ma'am, what is your purview on the media trial on social media offenses when certain information may be shared with the court but is not shared with the common people? As a common citizen and not a law abiding citizen, I believe there is a high manipulation of fact.
Now, see, you need to understand today that is one of the reasons why during the COVID period also, there was a lot of fake news which was spreading on WhatsApp and multiple other social media platforms. One of the reasons to bring all of this in control was the intermediary rules, where if a complaint is made to the grievance redressal officer, immediately he has to take action. He cannot just sit over it over, let's say, 10 days, 15 days and let such things percolate. The same thing, the issue of media trial starts when there isn't adequate, proper information. Everybody wants to make headlines, everybody wants to be the first person to break the news. Now, information which is before the court of law is obviously information which is accurate, given on affidavit on oath by the parties. They cannot back out from that information. That is factual. Information that may be provided on social media platforms and by news channels which are not compliant with the broadcasting law of India. So there are multiple portals, let's say even on channels like YouTube, multiple other portals also which are existing, websites, news websites which are existing, which are not compliant with the broadcasting rules. Like if you will see the traditional news channels, there is a huge list of compliance that they need to have in place with respect to news. They cannot just post any news, circulate any news, but a lot of digital media platforms, because this was a new development. Digital media started growing, I would say, in the last 3-4 years. Before that, you never had online digital news. You always had news channels having their portals, or you had newspapers having their portals, which were all regulated entities. Now, new digital media platforms which are not regulated is where the whole issue of media trial starts, the whole issue of fake information starts. And them not coming in the purview prior to the intermediary rules is what led to this entire situation. So media trial, obviously, whenever you hear any news from, it's like you will see even on news channels, one news channel will give you ABC version, another news channel will give you an XYZ version. So with respect to legal situations, legal cases, it's always very important that if you have the opportunity and there is a judgment which is passed in the case, please read the judgment. That is what is going to give you an accurate perspective of what the case was all about.
Sure, very valid point. And generally, as a normal user, and this is probably an extension of question from my side. As a normal user or a citizen, where would we source the copies of the judgment? Where can we source the copies?
Oh, well, they're all available online now. So this is quite unlike 15, 20 years back where, you had to go to a law library or to the high courts or to the, searching these books among huge compendiums. Today, if you will look, Supreme Court has a website on which all judgments are available online. The High Court judgments are available online. So you actually have multiple, reported judgments which are available for a common user online.
Fantastic. I think that's a very, very good perspective. So, audience who've not heard this, please go to the Supreme Court or the High Court site, and you will get all the judgments available there.
Yes.
And you can do your respective searches for the specific judgments. Puneet, I have two more questions for you. The next question is, what is your view on the user education in the entire policy framework for cybersecurity?
Well, that is the most important thing. As what I mentioned also, during the COVID period, the reason why so many financial frauds took place is because of lack of user awareness and education on using these platforms. Today, as I told you, if the user is not fully educated and aware, he is absolutely vulnerable. So it's not then it doesn't matter whether or not you come in a vulnerable category. You actually are rendered vulnerable by your own lack of skill set. So it's absolutely important as an individual. Today, I would say, why are you waiting for somebody else to educate you? You have Google on your phone. Everybody is having Google, etc. Please educate yourself about these aspects. This is basic everyday, day-to-day things. Today, you're making payments online. You're buying things online. So definitely, I'm sure you can take 10 minutes out in a day. Every day, 10 minutes. You love Googling. Just Google about this subject and educate yourself in this.
Absolutely. And in fact, just coming to the payment transaction issues as well, many a times where we become praise or victims on social media is where it's not about we sharing our bank details or we sharing our card numbers. It's more about where we actually share our OTPs, where we share our
Yes.
CVVs, right? And those are the critical information that we need to be very, very careful that and that's the awareness levels, at least from a transaction perspective. I can say obviously data is something where we've seen some examples of certain kidnapping cases where purely through location based tracking, right, on social media, where a mother was using check-ins to kind of say that what time her baby was left to school and what time the baby was essentially picked up, and that trend was essentially picked up, and the baby was kidnapped just a few minutes before the mother actually went to the school to pick up the baby. And after, so those have been pretty much, and then again those have been certain cases which have been reported. So you got to be very careful in terms of how you share your information, how you deal with it. Don't befriend any stray users who you do not know on Facebook and things like that, and only when you know them, they are of repute, then only you accept their friend request. Otherwise, please don't do that. Puneet, last question for the day. Unless and until we don't have more questions, how robust and prepared are our enforcement agencies in meeting the need of investigation into a social media crime? Interesting
But
question.
actually, it's been last 6 to 7 years that the police departments have been undergoing training in this space. And how robust they are now, as and when the cases are going to get reported, the investigations are going to happen, the system is all falling into place, is when the time is going to tell in the coming years. So it's been 4 5 years where even in Maharashtra, if you will see, there has been a huge amount of training. Every police station has to have one officer trained in this field. So you basically, the system is working. Now, if you will say the system should be fully ready, now the truth is these kind of offenses are ever evolving. Now, 10 years back, what was there, and 10 years today, from if you are going to count in this 10-year duration, everything has changed. 20 years back, what was there and what is today, everything has changed. And what will be there 10 years later will also change. So in some subject which is so dynamic, this is not like mainstream offenses which are governed by the Indian Penal Code in routine cases. So the burglary and theft definition doesn't change. For a police officer, from when he joins his job, he needs to identify these are the ingredients, and then I will classify this as a theft. Today in cyber crimes, what happens? The ingredients keep changing, the modus operandi of the crime keeps changing. So for a police officer also, you need to understand it is not that easy. We may question that, oh, why they are not able to do it. But you need to understand the criminals are evolving, the law is evolving, the offenses are evolving, the ingredients of the offenses and the evidences are also changing. So if you were in the position of a police officer, it would not be that easy. It will require constant upgradation. And that process is going on.
Sure. Thank you so much for that perspective. And one more thing I can add is that, please have confidence in our law enforcement agencies,
Yes.
because the first time you encounter a crime, or every time you encounter a crime, and whether you are a victim or you have somebody who's has become a victim, please encourage them to report it to the cyber cell, the
Mhm.
nearest cyber
Yes.
cell. Now, every police station has a cyber cell. As Puneet rightly pointed out, one or two police personnels are mandated to kind of be cyber trained. So from that perspective, and of course, we have larger cyber cells as well at nodal points within the city and the district. So, please entrust and go ahead and report your cases. With that, I would thank Puneet for your, uh, great insights. Very, very, I would say, mind-boggling, and basically has opened up I would say, a great thought process for me to at least go back and do further research and understand. Look at certain judgments, for example, or talk about the transactions, or talk about the women's safety. I think all of that very, very well covered. And once again, wishing you all the very best on your book launch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Back to you, Priyanka.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Garkal, for taking forward this discussion so beautifully. I think with your questions, we have been able to cover much of the ground and give enough information for people to get interested, for people to get alert that they need to start educating themselves, start taking the social media a little more seriously than what we usually do. So, thank you so much for guiding this discussion so well. I would also like to thank Advocate Puneet Bhasin for giving her thoughts, insights, and perspectives, and uh, clarifying a lot of things that we usually take for granted. And as I said, that this short discussion will actually become a starting point for a lot of individuals to start looking into the subject a little more seriously, a little more differently, and educate themselves. I think that is a very key takeaway from today's discussion, that you can start educating yourself now. And I think with that, we will close today's discussion. Thank you, both of you, and thank you, the audience, for joining us and making this an interesting discussion. Thank
Thank
you.
you, and wishing everybody a happy Republic Day in advance. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
Yes.
yes. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.